A police officer bound to a railway track, a newborn infant beside him, represents the pinnacle of human cruelty. It is a scene so disturbing it defies comprehension. Despair seemed absolute until the impossible happened. A little girl and her small dog emerged as the only hope in the face of imminent chaos. A heavy night had fallen over the outskirts of Porto Alegre. Lieutenant Marcelo Cardoso drove his patrol car, his eyes scanning the poorly lit streets where lampposts cast trembling shadows on the damp asphalt. A phone call received minutes earlier still echoed in his mind. "There's an abandoned baby on the train tracks, near the level crossing. If you don't come alone, the child dies." Marcelo parked his vehicle a few yards from the indicated location, his heart pounding. He stepped out cautiously, his right hand resting on the holstered weapon as his eyes swept the deserted surroundings. The silence was broken only by the cold wind that cut through the night and the distant hum of the city. As he approached the tracks, the officer heard a faint, almost inaudible cry. He quickened his pace and soon spotted a small blue bundle between the railroad ties. A newborn baby, wrapped in a faded blue blanket, was stirring uncomfortably. Forgetting all caution for a moment, Marcelo knelt to pick the infant up. It was his fatal mistake. 3 men emerged from the shadows like phantoms. The first struck him on the back of the neck, making him stagger. The second pinned his arms, while the third delivered precise punches to his stomach and face. The lieutenant tried to fight back, but the element of surprise and the numerical disadvantage made it impossible. "We finally got you, Cardoso," whispered one of the assailants, his face hidden by the darkness. "You messed with the wrong people." Dazed, Marcelo tasted the metallic tang of blood in his mouth as he was dragged onto the tracks. With swift, practiced movements, the men shackled his wrists and ankles with heavy chains and padlocks, immobilizing him completely. The baby was placed just inches away, still wrapped in its blanket. "The train passes in 20 minutes, one of the men stated coldly. "Enough time to think about your sins, but not to escape." The assailants vanished as quickly as they had appeared, taking the officer's phone and weapon with them. Marcelo struggled against the chains until the metal cut into his skin, but it was useless. The padlock was securely locked. In the distance, a train whistle began to sound, heralding the relentless approach of death. The lieutenant looked at the crying baby beside him. 2 lives bound to a cruel fate, with no chance of rescue or escape. The darkness of the night seemed to swallow them whole as the tracks began to vibrate beneath their immobilized bodies. The train's whistle tore through the frigid Porto Alegre night, an omen of death. Lieutenant Marcelo Cardoso strained against the chains binding him to the tracks, his bruised body protesting every movement. Beside him, the newborn, still swaddled in the blue blanket, cried desperately, as if it understood the imminent danger. "Help! Somebody help me!" the officer shouted, his voice nearly lost in the growing roar of the approaching locomotive. The train's lights were already illuminating the tracks in the distance, a merciless glare. It was then that a sharp bark cut through the air. Emerging from the shadows, Ana Clara, a frail-looking girl of just 8 years, ran toward the tracks. Her disheveled hair and tattered clothes spoke of a life on the streets, but her eyes shone with determination. At her side, Thor, an imposing German shepherd, advanced with purpose. "Hold on, mister!" Ana Clara shouted, quickly kneeling beside Marcelo. The lieutenant stared at her in disbelief. "Get out of here, kid! The train is coming," he ordered, but the girl was already examining the padlock on the chains. With trembling hands, Ana Clara picked up a sharp-edged stone. Years of surviving on the streets had taught her tricks no child should ever know. She jammed the point of the stone into the keyhole and began to work it, while Thor barked anxiously, as if warning them that time was running out. "There's not enough time," Marcelo murmured, feeling the ground tremble violently beneath him. With a sudden snap, the padlock gave way. Ana Clara pulled the chains free from the officer's wrists. Thor immediately clamped his teeth onto the sleeve of Marcelo's shirt and began to drag him off the tracks, while the man, gathering his last reserves of strength, held the baby tightly to his chest. The train was less than 50 yards away when Ana Clara, with a strength that belied her size, helped Thor pull the lieutenant and the newborn to safety. The three of them tumbled down the embankment beside the tracks, the baby protected in the officer's arms. The train thundered past with a deafening roar, kicking up dust and dry leaves. For a moment, no one moved. Then Thor licked Ana Clara's face, as if celebrating the miracle they had performed together. You saved our lives," Marcelo murmured, looking at the unlikely pair of heroes. Ana Clara simply smiled, stroking Thor's fur. "He can smell people in danger. He was trained by the military police before he ended up with me," she explained, as the dog sat proudly beside her, as vigilant as a guardian. Lieutenant Marcelo Cardoso opened his eyes to the fluorescent lights of Conceição Hospital. His entire body ached, with bruises covering much of his torso and a bandage on his forehead. He tried to sit up, but a nurse gently stopped him. "Stay down, Lieutenant. You've sustained serious injuries," she explained, adjusting the IV drip. "The baby," Marcelo murmured, his voice hoarse. "Where is the baby?" "She's safe in the pediatric ward. Miraculously, she wasn't seriously harmed." The door to the room opened, and Chief Sergio Mendez walked in, his face etched with concern. Marcelo's superior pulled up a chair and sat by the bed. "Glad to see you're awake, Cardoso. You gave us quite a scare," the chief said, running a hand through his graying hair. "Can you tell me what happened on those tracks?" With difficulty, the lieutenant recounted the anonymous call, the abandoned baby, and the ambush. He also mentioned the girl and the dog who had saved him, but when he asked about them, the chief just shook his head. "No one saw any girl or dog. When the patrol car arrived, they only found you and the newborn." A pediatrician entered the room holding a chart. "About the baby," she began. "She's a healthy girl, approximately 3 weeks old. There are no corresponding birth records in the region's hospitals. No identification." The chief sighed deeply. "That's not all. We've received reports of 3 other infants disappearing in the last 2 months, all from outlying neighborhoods. We're investigating a possible connection." Marcelo felt a chill that had nothing to do with his injuries. "Child trafficking?" "Possibly. I've already assigned a team to investigate. In the meantime, the little one will remain under police protection here at the hospital." That night, ignoring medical advice, the lieutenant dragged himself to the pediatric ward. Through the glass, he watched the newborn sleeping peacefully in her crib. Who could abandon such a helpless creature? And why had someone lured him into that trap? An older nurse approached, watching him with curiosity. "You should be resting." "I just wanted to see if she was all right," Marcelo replied. "She is. It's a miracle considering the circumstances," the woman commented, adjusting the blue blanket that enfolded the baby. "You know, I've worked here for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like what's been happening lately." "What do you mean?" The nurse glanced from side to side before whispering. "She isn't the first baby to appear mysteriously. There's something wrong happening in this city, Lieutenant. Something very wrong. Marcelo Cardoso watched the girl sitting in the hospital corridor, clutching the huge German shepherd, as if her life depended on it. When the social worker tried to separate her from the animal, Ana Clara reacted with a ferocity surprising for someone so small. "He stays with me, or I run," the girl declared, her determined eyes fixed on the adults surrounding her. The lieutenant, still bandaged and with his arm in a sling, intervened. There was something about this child, perhaps the same resilience he needed to find in himself. "Leave them together for now," he requested, approaching carefully. "They saved my life." In the days that followed, as he recovered, Marcelo forged a fragile connection with Ana Clara. The girl, initially distrustful, began to open up when she realized the officer wouldn't try to separate her from Thor. "How do you survive on the streets?" he asked one afternoon when they were alone. Ana Clara hesitated, stroking the dog's fur before answering. "I know how to read the marks," she said finally. "What marks?" The little orphan then explained the symbols drawn in chalk on sidewalks, posts, and walls throughout Porto Alegre, a secret language invisible to most adults. Circles with crosses meant immediate danger. Spirals indicated the presence of predators. Triangles pointed toward temporary shelters. "The older kids teach the younger ones," she explained, drawing on a piece of paper Marcelo offered. "This one means a man who hurts. This other one is a woman who helps." The lieutenant watched in astonishment as Ana Clara revealed a complex survival system, created and maintained by children who were invisible to society. Thor, lying at her feet, remained alert, as if he understood the gravity of the moment. "Is that how you found me on the tracks?" Marcelo asked. The girl nodded. "I saw the silent scream symbol near the train line. It means someone needs help but can't call out." Marcelo felt a lump in his throat. For years he had patrolled these same streets, never noticing the invisible signs that guided these helpless children. "Thor protects me," Ana Clara continued, hugging the animal. "I found him injured last year. I took care of him. Now he takes care of me." The officer realized then that this was not just any street kid. Ana Clara was a survivor, a decipherer of the codes the city tried to hide. And together with her faithful canine companion, she could be the key to unraveling the mystery of the abandoned baby, and perhaps much more. With the baby's blue blanket in his hands, Lieutenant Marcelo Cardoso watched as Thor sniffed the fabric intently. The German shepherd, trained by the military police for rescue operations, lifted his snout to the wind and let out a low whine, indicating he had caught the scent. "He's found something," whispered Ana Clara, kneeling beside the animal. The girl stroked the dog's fur, her watchful eyes following his every move. Marcelo nodded, fastening his bulletproof vest. "We'll follow Thor, but stay behind me at all times." Through the cold Porto Alegre dawn, the trio moved through deserted streets. The officer kept his hand on his weapon, while the 8-year-old girl held tightly to Thor's leash. The dog moved with determination, pausing occasionally to reconfirm the scent trail. After nearly an hour, they reached the Navegantes district. Thor led them to a partially abandoned industrial complex, stopping before a brick warehouse with broken windows and letting out a low bark. "This is it," the lieutenant murmured, cautiously surveying the area. Ana Clara tugged on his jacket sleeve. "Look," she said, pointing to white chalk marks near a side entrance. "They're the same symbols I used to follow on the streets." Marcelo moved closer to examine them. An inverted triangle with a circle in its center was drawn near the rusty lock. Beside it was a series of parallel lines, What do they mean? He asked. The triangle is danger for children, Ana Clara explained, her voice barely a whisper. The lines are days. 5 lines. 5 days. Thor remained restless, sniffing intensely at the entrance. The officer used a flashlight to inspect the area, discovering recent tire tracks in the mud and cigarette butts still fresh with ash. Someone was here just a few hours ago, he concluded. With extreme care, they forced their way in through the back. The warehouse interior showed clear signs of occupation. Plastic chairs, leftover food, empty bottles. In a corner, on a makeshift table, lay scattered papers and a map of the city marked with more symbols. Ana Clara held Thor tightly as the dog began barking at a side door. Marcelo opened it cautiously, revealing a small room with mattresses on the floor and children's blankets. They were keeping children here, the lieutenant concluded, taking photos with his phone. Thor sniffed one of the mattresses and then returned to the blue blanket Marcelo was still carrying, confirming the connection. There was no doubt. This place was part of an organized child trafficking operation. We need to get out of here, Marcelo said, pulling Ana Clara by the hand. We have enough proof to come back with reinforcements. After 3 days of investigation, Lieutenant Marcelo Cardoso finally located Conceição Oliveira's address. The old house in the Menino Deus neighborhood seemed as worn as its occupant, with windows papered over by yellowed newspapers and a garden that had long since lost any trace of care. Marcelo knocked 3 times before he heard hesitant footsteps. The door creaked open just enough to reveal the wrinkled face of the former nurse. I've already told you, I don't speak to reporters, she mumbled, trying to push the door closed. Ma'am, I'm a police officer, he explained, holding up his badge. I need your help with a case involving an abandoned baby. The mention of the baby drained the color from the old woman's face. After a moment's hesitation, she let him in. The interior of the house was clean, but cluttered with newspaper clippings and old photographs of the Conceição hospital. Marcelo noticed that many of the articles were about missing children. You're not the first to come looking for me about babies, Conceição said, sitting down with difficulty. But you might be the first who actually wants to help. Marcelo showed her the photograph of the newborn found on the train tracks. The old woman's reaction was immediate. Her eyes filled with tears. I recognize this child, she admitted, her voice trembling. There are patterns in the birth records. Altered dates. Mothers who never existed. The ex-nurse rose with a struggle and pried a loose board from the floor. From the space beneath, she pulled out a faded file. I was forced to falsify documents for years. They threatened my family, she explained, her trembling fingers leafing through the papers. This baby has the same birthmark I recorded last week, a small crescent-shaped mark on the nape of her neck. Who's behind all this? Marcelo asked, his heart beginning to race. I've never seen the boss, only the middleman, she replied. A man they all call the commissioner. He's the one who selects the children, organizes the transfers. Conceição handed Marcelo a small slip of paper with a name and phone number. This contact might lead you to him. But be careful, Lieutenant. These people have connections everywhere, even within the police. Leaving the house, Marcelo felt the weight of his responsibility grow heavier. This wasn't just about Ana Clara or the rescued baby. There were other children in danger. And now, with the commissioner's name in his hand, the officer knew he was one step closer to unraveling the entire criminal network. Night was falling over the Navegantes district as Lieutenant Marcelo Cardoso, Ana Clara, and Thor approached the abandoned warehouse. The officer had organized a tactical operation with minimal support. Just two trusted colleagues from the force to avoid any leaks. The smell of mold and dampness filled the air as they advanced, their low-intensity flashlights cutting through the gloom. "Stay close to me," Marcelo whispered to the girl, who held Thor's leash tightly. The German shepherd remained on high alert, sniffing the air with increasing intensity as they moved deeper into the building. It was Ana Clara who first noticed the symbols drawn in chalk on the interior walls, the same codes she had learned to interpret on the streets. "There," she pointed. "It means there are children here." Thor suddenly tensed, the fur on his back bristling. Before Marcelo could react, the dog lunged forward, pulling the leash from the girl's hands. The rescue dog darted down a narrow corridor toward a locked door. The lieutenant signaled for the other officers to take position and, with a precise move, broke down the door. What they found inside froze the blood in their veins. Two small children, no more than 3 years old, sat on filthy mattresses. Beside them, a folder with scattered documents revealed a list of coded names and international destinations. Marcelo quickly photographed all the material, while his colleagues comforted the terrified children. "Look out!" Ana Clara screamed. A man emerged from the shadows, lunging at the girl with an iron bar. Thor reacted instantly, throwing himself between the attacker and Ana Clara. The impact was violent. The German shepherd took a heavy blow to the ribs but managed to tackle the man, who was immediately subdued by the other officers. While the officers handcuffed the henchman, Marcelo rushed to check on Thor. The animal was breathing heavily, lying on his side. Ana Clara knelt beside him, crying as she stroked the dog's fur. "He's going to be okay," the lieutenant assured her, though his own voice betrayed his worry. "We need to get out of here fast." With Thor in the arms of one of the officers and the two rescued children safe, the group left the warehouse. In the patrol car, Marcelo examined the seized documents, discovering connections to other disappearances. One of the sheets bore the symbol Ana Clara knew as the Commissioner. "This is bigger than we thought," he murmured, watching the girl comfort the wounded dog in the back seat. Thor had saved more than just lives that night. He had provided the first concrete proof of the criminal syndicate plaguing Porto Alegre. The test results arrived at Conceição Hospital, while Marcelo Cardoso waited anxiously in the hallway. The attending physician, clinical chart in hand, revealed the stunning discovery. The baby rescued from the tracks was Beatrice Whitaker, the grandniece of Judge Alvaro Whitaker, one of the most influential figures in the Rio Grande do Sul Court of Justice. "The little girl disappeared 3 days ago from her parents' home in Ipanema," the doctor explained, handing the documents to the lieutenant. "We've already notified the family, and they're on their way." A chill ran down Marcelo's spine. The involvement of such a powerful family changed the entire game. He watched the baby sleeping peacefully in the hospital crib, oblivious to the storm her identity had just unleashed. Ana Clara, sitting in the corner of the room with Thor lying at her feet, noticed the change in the officer's expression. "Is the baby okay?" the girl asked, stroking the German shepherd's fur. "Yes, we found out who she is," Marcelo replied, moving closer to her. "She has an important family that was looking for her." Less than an hour later, Judge Whitaker burst through the hospital corridors, flanked by private security. The magistrate, an imposing man in his 60s, stopped before Marcelo. "Where is my Beatrice?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Marcelo led him to the nursery. Upon seeing the small child, the judge couldn't hold back his tears. After the emotional reunion, Whitaker turned back to the lieutenant. "I want to know everything. Who did this, and why?" As he recounted the events, Marcelo realized he was facing a powerful ally, but also a greater danger. If someone had the courage to kidnap a judge's grandniece, the limits of this criminal network were far wider than he had imagined. On their way out of the hospital, a nurse discreetly handed Marcelo an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Drop the investigation. The next one on the tracks will be the little girl." The lieutenant instinctively glanced over at Ana Clara, who was playing with Thor in the hospital garden. The threat was unmistakable. He crumpled the paper in his fist, feeling the crushing weight of responsibility. "We need protection," Marcelo said to Judge Whitaker. "Not just for your family, but for Ana Clara, too. She and her dog are key witnesses." The magistrate nodded grimly. "You'll have all the support you need," he guaranteed, his gaze falling on the girl and her dog. "But I want these criminals behind bars, no matter the cost." Marcelo knew that from that moment on, the hunt had become personal for everyone involved, and infinitely more dangerous. Lieutenant Marcelo Cardoso sat on the edge of the hospital bed, his trembling hands clutching a cup of cold coffee. The quiet room stood in stark contrast to the turmoil in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he didn't see Ana Clara or the rescued baby. He saw the face of Mateus, the 6-year-old boy he had failed to save 3 years ago in Alvorada. The operation should have been simple. A quick kidnapping, a swift negotiation, a safe rescue. But everything fell apart when the cornered kidnapper decided he wouldn't be leaving that apartment alone. Marcelo could still hear the gunshot, the silence that followed, and the weight of the small body in his arms as he ran for the ambulance. "You can't save them all," his superiors had said. Empty words that did nothing to fill the abyss that had opened inside him. After the incident, the officer requested a transfer, distanced himself from his colleagues, and immersed himself in a solitary routine that shielded him from the danger of caring again. Now, looking out the window of the Conceição hospital, he saw little Ana Clara playing with Thor in the garden. The girl who lived on the streets, deciphering chalk symbols to survive, had awakened something he thought was dead. A second chance. Dona Conceição entered the room without knocking, carrying a yellowed file. "I know what you're thinking," the ex-nurse said, her gaze penetrating. "You think you're going to fail her like you failed that boy." Marcelo looked away. "How do you know about that?" "Porto Alegre is a small town for those who know how to listen," she replied, sitting beside him. "That tragedy wasn't your fault. But what happens to Ana Clara and these children now? That is in your hands." The lieutenant glanced at Thor, who, sensing his gaze, lifted his head toward the window. The animal seemed to understand the weight of the choices that lay ahead. "What if I'm not capable?" he asked, more to himself than to the old woman. "Then who will be?" Dona Conceição stood up with difficulty. "The fear of failure has already cost many lives in this story, including my own, which hasn't been a life since I started forging those records." Outside, Ana Clara waved at him, a simple gesture that carried a trust Marcelo didn't feel he deserved. The girl didn't know he was a broken man, haunted by failure. "You have two choices," the old woman continued, walking toward the door. "You can remain paralyzed by the ghost of that boy, or you can honor his memory by saving those who can still be saved." When she left, Marcelo noticed his hands had stopped trembling. The past wouldn't change, but the future of Ana Clara and the other children, was yet to be written. Marcelo Cardoso stared at the ceiling of his apartment, unable to sleep. The decision to take in Ana Clara hadn't been an easy one. His history with children was marked by tragedy, That operation in Alvarado still haunted his nightmares. But something about the 8-year-old girl awakened a protective instinct he thought was long dead. "You need to hold it like this," he explained the next morning, adjusting the girl's small hands into a defensive stance. "If someone tries to grab you, aim for the eyes or the throat." Ana Clara absorbed every instruction with the seriousness of someone who already knew the world's dangers. Her eyes, far older than her years, reflected a lifetime of survival on the streets of Porto Alegre. Thor watched the training intently from a corner of the room, his presence a constant source of security for the girl. The German shepherd, though still recovering from his injuries, remained alert to every movement. "Thor can sense when someone is dangerous," Ana Clara commented, stroking the dog's fur. "He always warned me on the streets." "And how did he do that?" the lieutenant asked, genuinely curious. "He'd get tense with his ears like this," she demonstrated with her hands. "Then I knew I had to run." In the following days, Marcelo adapted his routine. He turned the small utility area into a makeshift bedroom for Ana Clara. He bought her clothes and school supplies with his own money. The precinct had arranged for temporary documents, while the custody process moved through the courts. At night, when the nightmares came, it was no longer just the face of the lost child from Alvarado that Marcelo saw. Now, it was the fear of failing Ana Clara that terrified him. One afternoon, returning from the supermarket, he found the girl teaching Thor to shake a paw in exchange for treats. "He's so smart," she said, smiling for the first time since he'd met her. "You both are," the officer replied, a lump forming in his throat. That evening, while Ana Clara slept, Marcelo reviewed case files. Thor padded over, resting his snout on his hand, as if he understood his concern. "We're making a strange little family, aren't we?" he whispered to the dog. His phone vibrated. It was a message from his superior. Another child had disappeared in Humaitá. Marcelo looked toward the room where Ana Clara was sleeping, then at Thor. The rescue dog seemed to understand that the battle was far from over. For the first time in years, the lieutenant felt he had something truly important to protect, and that, more than any official training, gave him the strength to face what was to come. With trembling hands, Dona Conceição handed Marcelo Cardoso a yellowed file, worn by time. The lieutenant felt the weight of responsibility as he took it, while the ex-nurse met his gaze with eyes heavy with guilt. "I kept this for years. Every time a child disappeared, I made a note. I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid," the old woman confessed, adjusting the glasses on her wrinkled face. Inside the dossier, Marcelo found a disturbing collection. Forged birth certificates, photographs of newborn babies, and meticulous notes on dates and locations. Most surprisingly, there were precise drawings of the same symbols Ana Clara had described. The circles, crosses, and lines that formed a code on the streets of Porto Alegre. "How did you get these, Aptam?" the officer asked, leafing through the aged pages. "I worked at Conceição for 30 years. I saw strange things happening. Babies who vanished, records that were altered," she answered, her voice low as if she still feared being overheard. "I started copying the symbols I saw on the walls near the hospital. Only later did I understand they were markers." Marcelo examined a series of photographs, children of different ages, all with frightened expressions. As he turned a page, a name leaped out at him. Priscilla Barbosa, social worker. "Do you know this woman?" he questioned, showing her the note. Dona Conceição nodded slowly. "She worked in social services. She had access to information about vulnerable children, broken families. She always seemed to show up right when a baby disappeared. A chill ran down the lieutenant's spine. Ana Clara, playing with Thor in the backyard, had mentioned a woman in a white coat who sometimes gave food to street children, but also wrote down their names. Among the documents was a city map with precise markings of the locations where children had vanished over the last 5 years. An unsettling pattern was forming around certain neighborhoods. "Why didn't you turn this in sooner?" Marcelo asked, trying to contain the frustration in his voice. The old woman lowered her eyes. "They threatened my family, and when I tried to speak up, no one believed me. They said it was the invention of a senile old woman." Marcelo carefully put the dossier away. Those pages contained not only evidence of a criminal network, but also the possibility of redemption for him and hope for Ana Clara. With this information, he could finally connect the dots and get to Priscilla Barbosa, the missing link he needed to dismantle the entire operation. "Thank you," he said, gently squeezing the former nurse's wrinkled hand. "I'll make this count." Priscilla Barbosa's name appeared again and again in Dona Conceição's dossier. Lieutenant Marcelo Cardoso studied the documents for hours, a disturbing pattern emerging. Every single missing child had been visited by the social worker just days before they vanished. With Ana Clara asleep on the sofa and Thor standing guard at his side, Marcelo reviewed the records from the Department of Social Services. The employee had privileged access to information on vulnerable families, especially those with newborns in precarious situations. "She selects the targets," he murmured to himself, organizing the evidence. The next morning, Marcelo assembled a tactical team to monitor Priscilla. They watched her for 3 days, finally catching her handing an envelope to a man in a cafe in downtown Porto Alegre. The contents? The addresses and routines of 5 families with infants in impoverished communities. The takedown was swift. Priscilla tried to flee through the back of the establishment, but was surrounded by officers. On her phone, they found coded messages and suspicious bank transfers. During the interrogation, the social worker remained impassive. Sitting in the cold room at the station, she denied any involvement until Marcelo laid the evidence on the table. "How many children did you hand over to the commissioner?" he asked, controlling his rage. Priscilla adjusted her hair and stared at the officer. "You don't understand how it works, Lieutenant. I'm not the one who decides. I'm just a piece. A piece that condemned dozens of children," Marcelo retorted, slamming his hand on the table. "Who is the commissioner?" The woman smiled, an empty smile. "If I talk, I'm dead, and so are you." Even with a warrant for her preventive detention, Priscilla remained silent. Investigators searched her apartment, finding a notebook with drawings of the same symbols Ana Clara recognized from the streets. Marcelo took the notebook home. While Thor rested on the rug, Ana Clara flipped through the pages, recognizing the codes. "This one means child available," she said, pointing to a circle with a cross. "And this one warns that observers are in the area." The lieutenant hugged the girl, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. With Priscilla in custody, one part of the network was dismantled. But the commissioner was still free, operating in the shadows. That night, Marcelo received a call from Judge Alvaro Whitaker. "Lieutenant, we need to talk. Priscilla Barbosa is asking for protection. She says she's ready to talk." The revelation hit Marcelo Cardoso like a punch to the gut. The hooded man who appeared in the security footage was Caio Hor, his former partner, who everyone believed had died 3 years ago in an operation against drug traffickers in Alvorada. The lieutenant stared at the frozen image on the computer screen, feeling the blood run cold in his veins. Impossible, he muttered, as his trembling fingers zoomed in on the image. But there was no doubt. The characteristic way he walked, the almost imperceptible scar on his chin, the look he knew so well from years of patrolling together. Ana Clara, sitting in the corner of the room with Thor lying at her feet, noticed the change in the officer's posture. "What's wrong? Do you know that bad man?" Marcelo couldn't answer immediately. Memories of the last time he had seen Caio flooded his mind. The building in flames, the screams, the explosion that had supposedly taken his partner's life. Now, it all made sense. The inside knowledge of police operations, the ease with which the commissioner always seemed to be one step ahead. "He was my friend," he finally answered, his voice thick with emotion. "My partner. I thought he died trying to save a child." The next morning, Marcelo was driving his car through the streets of Porto Alegre when he spotted a familiar figure entering a downtown cafe. His heart hammered in his chest. Without a second thought, he parked and followed the man inside. Their eyes met. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Caio smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Marcelo," he said calmly, as if running into an old acquaintance by chance. "I figured you'd find out eventually." "Why?" was all the lieutenant could manage, his hand instinctively close to his weapon. Caio shrugged. "You were always so righteous, so obsessed with doing the right thing. Do you know how much money moves through this network? Millions. And what did being a hero get you? Scars and a miserable salary. We're talking about innocent babies, Caio. It's just business, Marcelo. And you're in my way." His former partner stood up slowly. "Consider this a warning from an old friend. Walk away. Or next time, not even that little girl and her dog will be able to save you." When Caio left, he left behind not just an untouched coffee, but a man torn between rage and the pain of betrayal. Marcelo knew the real confrontation was yet to come, and it would be far more dangerous than this brief encounter. The enemy now had a face, and he knew all of Marcelo's weaknesses. Ana Clara's pink scarf had remained in a drawer of Marcelo Cardoso's desk since the night of the rescue. The faded, stained piece of fabric held more than just memories. It held evidence that could change the course of the investigation. While organizing the case files, the lieutenant found the small piece of cloth among his belongings. "This could have DNA," Marcelo murmured, examining the darkened stains on the fabric. He remembered Ana Clara wearing the scarf on the night they saved the baby from the tracks, and that it had gotten dirty during the struggle. At the forensic science lab, the expert Luisa Mendez received the scarf with professional interest. "I'll prioritize this analysis, Lieutenant. If there's viable genetic material, we'll have results in 48 hours." While he waited, Marcelo returned to his residence, where Ana Clara was playing with Thor in the yard. The German shepherd, still recovering from his injuries, limped slightly, but his energy as he interacted with the girl showed significant improvement. "Do you remember that pink scarf of yours? The one you had on the night we met?" he asked, sitting down beside the girl. "It was my mother's," Ana Clara replied, stroking the dog's head. "A man tried to take it from me that night, before I found you and the baby." This new information made Marcelo sit up straight. The girl had never mentioned this detail before. "Can you remember what he looked like?" "He was tall, and he had a scar here," she said, pointing to her own eyebrow. "Thor didn't like him and barked a lot." 2 days later, the phone rang. The forensic expert's voice was excited. "Lieutenant Cardoso, We found a match in the database. The blood on the scarf belongs to Rodrigo Menezes, who has a record for kidnapping minors in 2017, but was never convicted due to lack of evidence. A chill ran down Marcelo's spine. Rodrigo was a name that appeared in Dona Conceição's notes, listed as one of the network's intermediaries. He now had physical proof linking him directly to the case. "I'm issuing a warrant immediately," the officer said, already dialing Judge Whitaker. At the courthouse, Alvaro Whitaker signed the document with determination. "This is the first solid connection we have. We can't waste it." With the warrant in hand, Marcelo organized a tactical team. Finally, they had irrefutable proof. The DNA on the pink scarf, a mother's keepsake that Ana Clara had protected with such determination. It had become the key to unlocking the criminal network that was terrorizing Porto Alegre. In the operations room at the station, Lieutenant Marcelo Cardoso spread a map across the table as officers from the military brigade gathered around him. Judge Alvaro Whitaker, with dark circles under his eyes from sleepless nights, remained on the phone, securing the judicial warrant. "We have 48 hours before these children are moved out of the country," Marcelo explained, pointing to a warehouse in the Humaitá neighborhood. "According to our sources, there are at least 20 babies inside." Ana Clara, sitting quietly in a corner with Thor at her side, timidly raised her hand. "The symbols on the outside wall mean children in transit. I saw it near the market last week." The officer nodded, once again recognizing how valuable the girl's intuition was. Whitaker hung up the phone and approached the group. "We have judicial authorization and tactical support," the magistrate informed them. "But we need to be extremely cautious. My contacts have confirmed the commissioner has set up explosives around the perimeter." An officer handed Marcelo surveillance photos showing armed men patrolling the location. Among them was the familiar figure of Caio Hor, his former partner, now working for the other side of the law. "We'll divide the operation into 3 fronts," the lieutenant decided. "Alpha Team will neutralize the external guards. Beta Team will cut off the escape routes. I will lead Gamma Team to locate and secure the hostages." A female officer raised her hand. "And what if he follows through on his threat to detonate the explosives?" Silence hung heavy in the room. Marcelo looked at Ana Clara, remembering how he had nearly lost everything on those train tracks. He couldn't allow more children to suffer. "We have bomb disposal experts," the judge replied, "and we are counting on the element of surprise." As the final details were being settled, Marcelo approached Ana Clara and Thor. He knelt before the girl. "You're staying here this time, understand? Dona Conceição will be here to pick you up in an hour." The girl stroked the German shepherd's fur. "Thor can help find the babies. He's trained for it." Marcelo hesitated. The dog had exceptional skills, but taking him would mean putting him at risk again. "He'll stay in the rear, for tracking only," he finally conceded. "And you stay with Dona Conceição. No arguments." Ana Clara nodded reluctantly as she hugged Thor. As night fell, squad cars without sirens took up strategic positions around the warehouse. Marcelo checked his weapon and his bulletproof vest. Over the radio, the teams confirmed their positions. Thor, equipped with a protective vest, remained alert at his side. The countdown began. 3, 2, 1. The operation to save the innocent was underway, and there was no room for error. His breath coming in ragged gasps, his front paw still bandaged, Thor pushed forward determinedly through the dark corridors of the warehouse in the Humaitá neighborhood. The German shepherd ignored the pain, driven by an instinct that went beyond his military brigade training. Marcelo Cardoso followed a few meters behind, pistol in hand. while the other officers surrounded the outer perimeter. "Trust Thor," the lieutenant whispered into his communicator. "He'll find the children before the commissioner realizes we're here." The dog stopped abruptly before a metal door, scratching at it insistently. Marcelo signaled to the tactical team accompanying him. When they broke down the door, they found 5 babies in makeshift cribs, all with tags on their ankles indicating their price in dollars. "Evacuate the children. Thor and I are moving on," he ordered, noticing that the animal was already heading down another corridor, sniffing the air with urgency. In the next room, 3 more children were found. The operation seemed to be a success, until the sound of shattering glass echoed through the warehouse. Ana Clara, who was supposed to be in the police vehicle, had climbed into the building through a side window. "I saw Caio go in the back. He's going to escape with the documents," the girl shouted. Before Marcelo could react, Thor shot off in the girl's direction. The officer ran after them, his heart pounding with fear. As he rounded the corner, he saw Caio Hor dragging Ana Clara by the arm, a gun pointed at her head. "Drop the weapon, partner," Caio said with a twisted smile, "or the little girl will end up like that kid in Alvarada." Thor moved silently behind some crates. As Caio backed toward an emergency exit, the shepherd leaped with all his strength, sinking his teeth into the arm holding the gun. The shot echoed through the warehouse, but the bullet only hit the ceiling. Ana Clara managed to break free as Caio wrestled with the animal. Marcelo surged forward, but before he could reach them, Caio viciously kicked Thor into a stack of crates. The impact was brutal. The dog collapsed with a sharp yelp, a shard of wood impaled in his flank. "Thor!" Ana Clara screamed, rushing to the injured animal. Marcelo managed to immobilize Caio, cuffing him with excessive force. "You'll pay for everything," he muttered through clenched teeth. As the medical team arrived for the rescued children, Marcelo carried Thor in his arms, the dog's golden fur stained red. Ana Clara walked beside him, tears streaming down her face. "Is he going to be okay?" the girl asked, her voice trembling. "We'll do everything we can," the lieutenant replied, trying to contain his own emotions. "He's a hero, Ana, and heroes are strong." With the children finally safe, Lieutenant Marcelo Cardoso meticulously sifted through the boxes of documents seized from the Humaitá warehouse. Ana Clara slept on a makeshift couch at the station, while Thor, now bandaged, rested vigilantly at her feet. Exhaustion weighed on them all, but the adrenaline from the successful operation kept the officer alert. Among the papers, Marcelo found receipts, forged passports, and a detailed list of donations made to the Novos Horizontes Foundation. The name of businessman Eduardo Mendez, a well-known Porto Alegre philanthropist, appeared on nearly every document as the organization's president. "I've got something," the lieutenant said to the chief, who was approaching with 2 cups of coffee. "Eduardo Mendez, the man who appears in every society column as a benefactor to needy children. He's the commissioner." The chief examined the papers with a grave expression. "That explains how he operated so freely. Who would suspect the man who wins Citizen of the Year awards?" Marcelo connected the dots quickly. The NGO was the perfect front. Vulnerable children were identified by a woman named Priscilla Barbosa, kidnapped by Caio Horror and his accomplices, and then adopted by foreign families willing to pay a fortune. The documents revealed wire transfers from European and Asian countries, all disguised as donations to the foundation. "He was making, on average, 200,000 reais per child," Marcelo murmured, flipping through the financial records. "This has been going on for years." When Judge Alvaro Whitaker arrived at the station to follow the case, his face paled at the evidence. "Mendez is a guest in my home. We attend charity events together. Ana Clara woke and approached them silently, Thor limping by her side. The girl looked at the photographs spread across the table, smiling children at foundation events. I know those symbols, she said, pointing to the NGO's logo, which contained geometric shapes similar to the chalk signs she had followed on the streets. They were warnings of danger. The judge placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. Thanks to you, hundreds of children are safe now. The next morning, the newspapers in Porto Alegre featured Eduardo Mendes's photo as he was being arrested. The empire of apparent kindness crumbled, revealing its true, rotten core. Later that day, Marcelo received a call. The businessman had been found dead in his cell, an apparent suicide. He wasn't the only one involved, the lieutenant told Ana Clara as they headed home. Someone didn't want him to talk. Ana Clara Cardoso adjusted the new backpack on her shoulders as she stared at the colorful facade of the Professor Helena Vittoria Municipal School. Marcelo Cardoso held her hand tightly, masking his own anxiety with an encouraging smile. Ready? He asked, crouching to meet her gaze. What if the other kids don't like me? Ana Clara whispered, her eyes fixed on the ground. The lieutenant gently brushed her hair back. It's impossible not to like the bravest person I've ever met. The enrollment had been a complex process. Without official documents, Marcelo had to call on his contacts at Child Protective Services and rely on the support of Judge Alvaro Whitaker, who expedited the bureaucracy. Now, Ana Clara officially carried the Cardoso surname on her provisional records, while the adoption process moved forward. During her first week of school, the teacher asked each student to share a personal story. When her turn came, Ana Clara simply told them how she and Thor had saved a police officer and a baby on the train tracks. The entire room fell silent until a wave of enthusiastic questions erupted. At home, Thor was recovering slowly. The German shepherd still limped on his hind leg, a lasting consequence of the fight at the warehouse, but his watchful eyes followed Ana Clara's every move. Every afternoon, upon returning from school, the girl would sit beside the dog and read her day's lessons aloud. He understands everything I say, she explained to Marcelo one evening. I'm sure he does, the officer agreed, observing the unbreakable bond between them. The story of their rescue spread through the city. A local newspaper published an article titled Four-Legged Heroes, Dog and Girl Save Lives in Porto Alegre. The military police organized a symbolic ceremony where Thor received a Medal of Honor, placed around his neck by the commander himself. Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Marcelo faced hearings and filled out endless forms. The adoption was progressing slowly, but with Judge Whitaker's backing, the outlook was positive. How long until it's official? Ana Clara asked one night over dinner. A few months, Marcelo replied, serving more rice onto her plate. But that's just a piece of paper. You're already my daughter in every way that matters. Later that night, as he tucked Ana Clara into bed, with Thor standing guard beside her, Marcelo realized that for the first time in years, the weight on his chest had lessened. The three of them, brought together by fate on a set of train tracks, had found something none of them had before. A family. Lieutenant Marcelo Cardoso faced the Military Police Disciplinary Council with a weary but determined expression. His superiors made no effort to hide their irritation over the unauthorized operation at the Humaitá warehouse. The commander slammed his hand on the table, demanding an explanation for the raid, which, despite its success, had ignored essential protocols. Your badge is on the line, Lieutenant, the colonel warned, holding the operation report with disapproval. Just then, the doors to the room swung open. Judge Alvaro Whitaker entered, imposing in his impeccable suit. The magistrate didn't need to raise his voice to command everyone's attention. He recounted how his own family had recovered their grandniece, thanks to the officer's courage. He then mentioned the hundreds of signatures collected by the citizens of Porto Alegre in support of the lieutenant. This man deserves recognition, not punishment, the judge concluded, placing a hand on Marcelo's shoulder. 3 days later, the officer was cleared of all charges. The local press hailed him as a hero, though he refused interviews and shunned the spotlight. The physical scars on his body were healing, but the invisible ones still ached. Meanwhile, Dona Conceição was packing her memories into 2 worn-out suitcases. The former nurse had received threats after her crucial testimony against the trafficking network. Federal agents escorted her to a vehicle with tinted windows parked in front of her house. "Where am I going?" she asked, clutching an old picture frame. "Somewhere safe," an agent replied. "Witness protection. New identity. New life." The old woman nodded, taking one last look at the home where she had lived for 40 years. At a psychological clinic in the city center, Ana Clara drew dark figures on a sheet of paper. The therapist watched attentively as the girl depicted her life on the streets with heavy strokes and dark colors. "And this symbol?" the professional asked, pointing to a circular mark in the drawing. "It means danger," the girl replied. "I learned to recognize all of them to survive." The therapy sessions were difficult. Ana Clara still woke up screaming some nights, reliving moments of terror. Marcelo would always rush to comfort her, while Thor would lie down beside the bed, ever watchful. On a rainy afternoon, the therapist called the officer in for a private conversation. "She's making progress, but the trauma runs deep," she explained. "The most important thing is that she now has stability and affection." Marcelo nodded, gazing out the clinic window. The physical wounds were almost healed, but he knew the emotional scars, both his and Ana Clara's, would take much longer to fade. Still, for the first time in years, he felt he was on the right path. The sun descended slowly behind the buildings of Porto Alegre, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. On the balcony of the small third-floor apartment, Lieutenant Marcelo Cardoso watched the natural spectacle with a cup of coffee in his hands. Beside him, Ana Clara swung her legs on a high stool, while Thor, his head resting in the girl's lap, received absent-minded scratches behind his ears. "Do you think we'll be okay here?" she asked, her eyes reflecting the golden light of dusk. Marcelo smiled, a smile that still carried the marks of pain, but now also held a glimmer of hope. "We will. This is our home now." The officer watched the girl who, in just a few months, had turned his life upside down. Ana Clara now attended the local public school, made friends, and was slowly shedding the habits of someone who had lived on the streets. Thor, fully recovered from his injuries, had earned a medal from the military police, which the lieutenant kept proudly displayed in the living room. The 3 of them formed an unlikely family, bound by scars both visible and invisible. The adoption process was moving forward, with the decisive support of Judge Whitaker, who had become a steadfast ally after the recovery of his grandniece. "Do you still have nightmares?" Marcelo asked, noticing how the girl stroked the German shepherd with more intensity when she was anxious. "Sometimes," she answered honestly. "But the doctor says it's normal, and when I wake up scared, Thor is already there, licking my hand." The dog, as if he understood, lifted his head and looked at them both, his unwavering loyalty evident in his attentive gaze. The doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. It was the mailman. Among the bills and advertisements, there was an envelope with no return address. Marcelo opened it carefully, his police instincts on high alert. Inside, there was only a single handwritten note. The commissioner is at large. Be careful. The lieutenant felt a chill run down his spine, but he kept his expression neutral so as not to alarm Ana Clara. He slipped the paper into his pocket and returned to the balcony. Everything okay? The girl asked, perceptive as ever. Everything's fine, he replied, sitting down again. Just another day's work waiting for me tomorrow. As the sky darkened, Marcelo reflected on how his own deepest wounds were beginning to heal. The guilt from the failed operation in Alvarado years ago no longer consumed him. He had a greater purpose now. Thor suddenly stood up, alert, and stared down at the street. After a few moments, he relaxed and settled back down. He'll always protect us, Ana Clara said with conviction. Marcelo nodded, his hand instinctively touching the holster beneath his jacket. The threat was still out there, but this time he wouldn't be facing the darkness alone. They had each other, and that made all the difference.